Trent Sandberg is a former Air Force officer and C-17 instructor pilot. He has flown airlift missions all over the world, including combat zones in Iraq and Afghanistan. During his time of service, he accumulated approximately 2,500 flight hours in the T-6, T-1, and C-17 aircraft. Trent hails from Nebraska and is a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado, and he currently resides in San Francisco. Pass it off to Trent.
Awesome. Thanks, Obed. Thanks, Anand. Really appreciate the invitation to come chat with you guys and more or less just show you some cool videos about C-17. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction and the background there. As they said, I flew C-17s in the Air Force for about 6 years and then separated. I live in San Francisco now and work for Google. But by far the coolest thing about me was the time I spent in the Air Force. So I'm going to show some videos and some pictures, and then just kind of more or less talk about the missions, the various missions that the C-17 flies. It's an incredible aircraft, and it's a tremendous asset to the United States Air Force and to our country on the whole. So I'll kick it off just by showing a video. I apologize, the audio may come through a little bit scratchy. The video may not transmit great, but there's some kind of cool things to see. So I think you'll probably get the big picture message by watching it. And if you haven't already done so, you can pin the presentation on the screen to make it big. I've actually flown that exact airplane. So what this is showing is they're actually loading an M1A1 Abrams tank on the C-17. And it may be a little bit difficult to truly appreciate the size and scale of the tank, but that tank weighs like 140,000 pounds. That's like 70 tons, which is why you can actually only put one on a C-17 because they're so massive and so heavy that it is a huge load.
Landing crew.
This is in Afghanistan. It's actually where they're landing here.
South 23, Roger, got the C-17 in the site. 23, Roger. Requested to the east, the one's that's ready to come.
Spoilers, sure. Hand on that stick.
Aircraft, so there's always the pilot flying, and then the pilot monitoring, who kind of runs checklists and kind of assists. Departure, I think, from the same airport that they just landed at. I know that this is a deployed crew because of the patch. I wore that same patch when I deployed to the area as well, and would fly these missions in and out of Afghanistan. Flying in and out of the combat zone is actually a lot of fun because you get to fly the aircraft in a little bit more of an aggressive manner. It's kind of a justification for kind of avoiding threats. This is at a base in the Gulf region. It's basically right on the Gulf. And these guys are taking off, probably flying to Afghanistan or Iraq.
Keep that port coming positive right, runway heading.
270, flying on departure line, flight level 230, runway heading, speed restriction.
This is somewhere in the U.S. I don't know where. So what we've seen so far are mostly normal landings. The C-17 obviously can operate in a very conventional fashion off of, normal sized runways. It can also operate off of very, very small runways. We call them assault landings. And the jet can actually land. I've actually had it stopped in under 2,000 feet of actual runway. It's it's hard to really appreciate the scale and sort of the size of the C-17 in these videos, but even more so, it's hard to really appreciate the performance of the jet in these videos, because you miss out on a lot of the scale. But it stops incredibly quickly for such a massive airplane. This is an airdrop formation. So the C-17 is one of the missions that I'll talk about when we kind of get a little bit further in the slides, but it has a mission of being able to airdrop both people as well as supplies and heavy equipment. I did that. I was an airdrop pilot when I flew, and so here these are heavy equipment drops, and you notice that it was actually parachute extracted out the back. So these these pallets and the load that they're airdropping is so heavy, they actually need a parachute to pull it out the back of the aircraft and then deploy a recovery chute. This is landing on dirt. C-17 can land on semi-improved surfaces. For a size comparison, it's about the size of a 767. A little bit heavier. It's kind of cool watching it kick up all that dust. Although it's probably less cool for these guys that are about to get dusted. So this is personnel airdrop. These guys are about to jump out the back. It's a static line. So you see that they've got those yellow cords, which are attached to a kind of like a carabiner that's attached to a cable. And then as they jump out, the static line actually pulls the parachute out and it gets stretched, and then the parachute in place, and then they drop to the ground. The aircraft is actually only about like 800 feet off the ground for these drops. So it happens very, very quickly from when they jump out to parachute deploys when they actually land. There's not a ton of time. I think this is in North Carolina, I think. You're wrong, though.
Airborne.
This is actually shot off the coast of California here, or in California. They did this shoot. This was, I don't know, probably like 6 or 7 years ago. They had like a plane. There's a longer sort of video of kind of like some really cool shots that they got flying along the coast of California. Anyway, so that's just kind of like the intro video. Now I'll kind of go over the C-17 and then talk about the various missions. So specifications, I pulled this off of probably Wikipedia. It's basically just kind of the numbers surrounding the aircraft. So it's basically 175 feet long, wingspan of about 170 feet as well, 55 feet tall. The crew. And this is just a basic crew, which is 2 pilots and 1 loadmaster. That's all that's required to operate the jet on really any mission. However, I say any mission, but when the jet flies into combat, typically it is augmented, meaning that you have at least 3 pilots and 2 loadmasters scanning for threats and doing other things kind of associated with flying in and out of the combat zone. Also for longer missions, basically anytime you're going to fly longer than anytime your duty day is basically from when you show up more or less to when you're done, when you land and shut down the aircraft. If it's longer than 16 hours, which is a pretty long day, then you have to be augmented as well, which would be 3 pilots and 2 loadmasters instead of 2 pilots and 1 loadmaster. And that's because you want to be able to cycle in and out of the seat and try and get rest. There is a bunk on the aircraft. There are actually 2 bunks that are available in kind of this crew rest area, so you can actually cycle through and get some rest for long missions. With an augmented crew of 3 pilots and 2 loadmasters, you can actually operate up to 24 hours continuously. And I did quite a few of those when I was flying, and those get to be really long days. An example of one of those days would basically be starting off in Germany, and where you wake up and then show up at the aircraft, and then you fly to Afghanistan, offload something, then maybe fly to another base in Afghanistan, pick something up, and then return to Germany. And you can do that all in one duty day, and it ends up being a long day. That type of mission would probably be about 20 hours or so to from leaving Germany to coming back to Germany. All of the C-17s, incidentally, are primarily based out of the U.S. There are no overseas U.S. bases that have the C-17 at them. All of the U.S. Air Force bases are in mostly continental United States, so Charleston, South Carolina, McCord Field, and Washington State. Actually, just up the road here, Travis Air Force Base, which is in Vacaville, or near Vacaville, Fairfield area. And then there's several other bases too. Those are the kind of the big ones. And then they're also in Hawaii and Alaska is primarily where they're based. However, the C-17 is a global aircraft, so it's constantly operating overseas, either on just missions where a crew will take a jet and go fly various missions around the world and then return to their home base, or on actual deployments where you'll take several jets and deploy with jets and crews and go somewhere around the world where you kind of like operate out of for a period of time. Usually it's a couple months, and then you return with the crews to your home station. I did 3 of those deployments when I was in the military, and they were actually a lot of fun. But maybe talk about that when we kind of get a little further down. Capacity, say, you can see there, basically you can pair troopers on, or the 150 troops with palletized seats. Basically, I think I may have a picture of it, but they actually have like these, they're kind of like palletized airline seats, basically. They're like 5 across, and they just roll them right down the middle here. And then you've got troops along the sidewall, plus troops in the middle on these like airline style seats. So you can fit about 150 people in there, plus all their gear will still be able to fit in the very back of the jet. There's some room for cargo. You can also have, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, you can also put litter, so like ambulatory patients and or litters in there, which are basically stretchers that kind of sit on these stands, I think is what they're called, and plus then medical attendants, physicians, and nurses to care for them. And that supports an aeromedical evacuation mission where you can actually move patients from one place to another. So it basically becomes a flying hospital. You can also take oversized cargo, such as helicopters. I've had actually four helicopters on board at the same time, and they were like Cobras, which is pretty cool to have like multiple helicopters on board. Payload, it can accommodate up to 170,000 pounds, which is quite a lot. It's a pretty heavy load. It's we don't often, or the C-17 does not quite often operate with 170,000 pounds of cargo, because you have to get pretty creative to actually be able to fit that much weight in a given space. Although you can definitely do it. I've done it before. The empty weight is 282,000 pounds. Max takeoff weight is 585,000 pounds. Again, it's a little bit heavier than a 767. Closer to a 777, although lighter than a 777. Fuel capacity, I put it in terms of gallons here. It's like 35,500 gallons of fuel. So like your average car typically takes like 13 to 15 gallons, depending on how big the car is. So this carries quite a bit more fuel. Also, to put it into perspective, so this 35,500 US gallons is about 245,000 pounds. of fuel. It's literally just fuel, so it's like 122 tons of fuel. That is more than the maximum takeoff weight of a C-130. C-130, I think their max takeoff weight is like 160,000 pounds. It, of course, depends on the model. But so we can carry more fuel in the C-17 and on a long-haul flight than in the entire max gross weight of a C-130. Granted, the numbers for the C5, of course, make this look small. So, size is relative. Power plant, it's got 4 Pratt & Whitney F-117s, which is the same as the engines that are on a lot of commercial 757s. It's a Pratt & Whitney 2000 engine. So if you've flown on a 757, there are a couple different models of engines that 757 can be equipped with. One's Pratt & Whitney. I think they definitely had a Rolls-Royce option. They may have had a GE option, but the Pratt & Whitney engine is the exact same engine. The only difference is it has 4 of them instead of 2 on the 757. Here is the cockpit of the 757. It's a fairly standard cockpit. Well, actually, it's not really that standard. Obviously, if you compare the cockpit of the C-17 to that of like a Dreamliner 787 or the A350, it's going to look a little bit analog and a little bit old school. However, it's an incredibly capable cockpit, an incredibly capable set of avionics. As you can see, we have 2 heads-up displays, which are really great. The heads-up display basically displays your primary flight display information, so airspeed and altitude, and then it's got kind of like an artificial horizon there as well. And then it also has what's called a flight path vector, which is basically like a little circle with kind of lines out of it, and it's basically the vector of the aircraft. So another way of putting it, basically, if you put that particular flight path vector on a spot on the anywhere, basically you do nothing, that is where the aircraft will fly or hit. So if you put it on a particular spot on the way, for instance, and you do nothing, that is exactly where the aircraft will hit, which is incredibly helpful when you're landing, and that's how you do like these really precise like spot landings, to put craft down like in a very specific location, and then you can also get it stopped very quickly. So flight path vector really enables that. Then, so all these 4 multifunction displays here, you can configure each of those to display one of like 5 different pages. The one on the right here is showing like kind of a configurations page, so you can see the deflection of all the flight control surfaces, plus flaps and the gear, and then it also has like brake temperatures on there. The second display from the right is a navigation display, which obviously displays all of your waypoints, whatever you have plugged in for your flight plan. It'll also display weather radar, and it'll also display kind of a color-coded 3-dimensional terrain model, which is super helpful when we fly low-level missions. The C-17 is also capable of flying like really low and fast to kind of ingress and egress a sort of a combat zone. The second display, so the next display over, which is the second from the left, that's the primary flight display. So it's basically your basic information, something that you would see like on a G1000 or in a slightly different format, but in a lot of sort of glass panels. It's basically what you'd see in like a G5, if you're familiar with that, in like a 172, just a much bigger version with more information. And then the display on the left is another navigation display as well. Actually, no, sorry, that's the traffic page. So you can pull up a special traffic page. The traffic will actually show up on the map page, but you can also pull up a special traffic page, which has more information, and it's displayed in a slightly different format. Then down kind of in the center console, there you have obviously the mission. It's called the mission computer. It's like an FMS that you'll see on like a lot of commercial airliners flight management system. But the difference is that the mission computer is much more specialized to the C-17, and it's so specialized because the C-17 has sort of special mission sets that need to be accounted for, like airdrop. You can compute air release points in the mission computer. Also, air refueling. The C-17 is able to receive fuel from air refueler, and so it needs to be able to account for that. And then there's some other cool things in there as well. They're also kind of on the center console. There are the other, configurable. There are panels that help you configure other things on the aircraft. To include, there are actually countermeasures on the C-17 for like flares, and then it's also equipped with the large aircraft infrared countermeasures, or LARCM. It's actually these really cool like laser pods, which if missiles fired at the C-17, it'll detect it, and it'll do some smoke and mirrors and some swamp gas and pure magic, and it will kind of help defend the aircraft from like a missile attack. Here's the HUD, and this is, I don't know why I picked this particular video. It's really dumb because it's like a second long. I think I shot it on my iPhone, and I meant to it's meant to show what the HUD looks like. It's really hard to get a good picture of the HUD. Anyway, it's more or less just the PFD. You can probably kind of see it. Just kind of green. Obviously, this is shot at night, so you can't see anything beyond. But during the day, obviously, it's a purely you're just looking out, and the HUD is it's focused to infinity, meaning that you can clearly see through it. You can see the information, and also it doesn't. You don't have to focus on it, and basically change your focus from what you're looking at outside. I mean, you obviously do to a certain degree, but it doesn't really mess with you. Okay, so having said that, that's mostly kind of establishing the basics about the aircraft. Now I'll talk about the various missions that the C-17 flies predominantly, and I'll start out with the top priority because of its importance, which is presidential support airlift. The C-17 gets tasked all the time to support the travel needs of the President of the United States domestically, but most in the largest scale, most often will support international trips. And I did these while I was flying the C-17, supporting both the president and the vice president, traveling to various places. And you transport, it's kind of incredible, actually, the amount of stuff and gear and people that are required to support the president's travel abroad. It would kind of boggle your mind how many jets are required and how much equipment are taken. Like obviously, like the basics, like the limousines, like that, those are kind of no-brainers. But then they also carry helicopters and backup helicopters. Oh, and backup limousines too. And then like sometimes, depending on where we're going, we'll actually haul in air stairs, like because I don't know why, but we'll actually bring in special air stairs for Air Force One. They'll bring in sometimes like fuel trucks. They'll bring in just like a whole host of support equipment. And that's just the equipment themselves. And then, of course, there's the Secret Service, all of their equipment, their vehicles, anything that they might need. And if the president's going on kind of a complex trip involving multiple stops, then it gets even more complicated because then you have even more equipment, and then you kind of have to leapfrog where the president's going. Like one particular trip that I participated in was in 2014. President Obama was visiting 4 countries in the Pacific, and I think it was Japan, Malaysia. I'm embarrassing myself now. I think it was Japan, the Philippines, Malaysia, and somewhere else. I forget if that was the Vietnam trip as well or not. But anyway, there were 4 different locations, and we had to stage a bunch of aircraft out of the Pacific. It was in Guam. And then these aircraft were basically kind of like shuffling equipment around to, you'd obviously, lead the president. And then as soon as the president leaves someplace, then you'd fly in, pick up all that equipment and all the personnel, and then you'd fly them to the next location. And it was incredibly busy and like very like fast-paced, but it was all to support this, incredibly important diplomatic mission that the president was engaged in, and it's super cool and very rewarding to be a part of that. It's also pretty cool to see it in operation. Anyway, so that's the top priority, the highest priority mission that the C-17 flies because of its visibility and because of its importance. Next mission is kind of the bread and butter of the C-17, which is what's called air-land. And this is basically a mission where fundamentally you just take stuff from one place to the next, basically just from A to B. You're just transporting either equipment or personnel or combination thereof. This, like one down here, this looks like it's probably some sort of a diplomatic mission. These, I think that's I'm pretty sure those are the, I forget what they call them, but they're these like executive compartments. So this is probably supporting like Secretary of State or something. And this happens from time to time where like they're going to either an austere location or they're doing these like, like it'll be like kind of a multi-country visit through Africa, for instance. And so they've got these little pods, more or less, where it's kind of like an Airstream trailer, basically. You decide, and they're like very nicely appointed, and then they kind of have like sleeping quarters and stuff like that. And so the VIP can kind of hang out in there and hold meetings and do whatever they need to do and get rest. And then a lot of their staff and their support personnel will kind of hang out outside, still in the jet, but kind of outside of these little pods. Otherwise, the C-17 can transport outsized cargo. Outsized just meaning large, bulky cargo, like what you see here in the lower left. And then, the top picture is basically just a picture of something being either loaded or unloaded. It's hard to tell. Airdrop, as you saw in the video, airdrop is a very important mission set for the C-17, and the C-17 is very, very capable with airdrop. It can be flown either solo, meaning one aircraft by itself can go airdrop supplies wherever it needs to be, or it can be a formation of aircraft. The largest formation I ever participated in, there were like 25 jets in a single formation. And you can kind of think of like the D-Day, like the Normandy invasion, like you've seen like pictures of that from like the 1940s. Obviously a little bit smaller scale, but much bigger aircraft. But you have the capability to drop like an incredible amount of supplies and personnel over a single point on the ground in a very short amount of time. So it's kind of like your break glass start war option. It's kind of like your how they typically in a formation like that, you would typically the first pass of RAF would typically drop the heavy equipment because you kind of want to, you don't really want to drop that on the people. So you drop that first. So that would be like the Humvee, that would be any sort of equipment that they would need to like start setting up a bear base, like excavators and backhoes and those big like cat bulldozers. So you would, and howitzers and other equipment. So you drop that first, and then it's like something like you'd see on the right there. And then after that's dropped, then you could have like a wave of personnel. So in that large formation, I think we dropped like 5,000 personnel or something on the same spot. I mean, it was huge. It was very, very massive. Maybe it wasn't 5,000. It may have been 2,000, but it was definitely in the thousands. And it was a very large. Yeah, it wasn't 5. I think it was like 2,000. But still, it was a very large drop of equipment and then personnel. They all got there, and then they kind of rally, and then they do their thing. Of course, my drop was purely an exercise. It wasn't real world. If it was real world, you would have known about it because it's on that sort of scale that it's very it would cause a lot of news. So like I said, airdrop can be a variety of types. These down here, this is called LCADs on the very bottom, or it's a low cost aerial delivery system. And these are essentially one-time use pairs. And then they're called bundles, even though they're kind of large. They're basically like a pallet full of, you can drop basically anything. You can drop food, you can drop water, anything that they would need from like a resupply perspective. I've dropped fuel actually for on the front lines in Afghanistan, basically on these forward operating bases, kind of like on the border of Afghanistan and like Pakistan, or even on the other various locations where they're very austere, and it's not permissible for them to receive resupplies from kind of land-based transportation methods. It's the aircraft like the C-17 and like the C-130 kind of become their lifeline to keep them resupplied at all times. So you fly on a single pass, you can drop 40 of these bundles on a single pass, and it's a tremendous amount of supply that can be delivered very, very quickly. Cost effective, but quickly. It's very expensive. Like I heard, because we were dropping fuel one time, and we dropped like, you can drop, have you seen those barrels of fuel? Like they're 55-gallon barrels of fuel. The C-17 can drop, you basically drop 4 of those on a single pallet, and then you drop 40 of those. So 160 barrels of fuel on a single pass go out the back and can be delivered. So that's a lot of fuel very quickly. Although the price per gallon of that fuel to actually get it to that forward operating base, I think it was like, I forget what the price was, but it was absurd. It was like in the hundreds of dollars per gallon of fuel. So you really wouldn't want to pay those prices if you go to your local Citgo. Here's a cool video. So this is, these are Humvees. They're going out the back. And the C-17, I don't know if you've seen a Humvee, but they're pretty big. They're like maybe a little size of a Tahoe, maybe. The C-17 is capable of dropping 8 of those on a single pass. So 4 on each side. Yeah, so this is a kind of a joint forces exercise as well.
Right. Let's break gear up.
Echo 10 heavy flight, you next in sequence.
These flights for airdrop, they get pretty busy because there are a lot of procedures, and especially they can get kind of complicated when you're operating in a formation. Making sure that the formation is established, and then you have to fly your flight plan, and then also you're not just flying to a place and then dropping your cargo and then egressing. You are, but you also have to do it in a very precise time controlled fashion. You're always timing to a time over target, and the variance has to be within like seconds. So you are your speed control and your time control is super critical. It's super complicated with when you have a formation, it gets a lot more complicated, but it's very important, and particularly in a war zone where a C-17 is not going to be operating in a vacuum. There are going to be a whole host of other assets that are going to be required to make sure that the airspace is clear, and the drop zone is clear, and everything is secure. And so the importance of being where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there is huge. So that's kind of like it's the bread and butter of what the airdrop crews do. They fly a route very precisely to drop the cargo at a very specific point in time. They have to account for winds. They have to account for other atmospheric conditions. And they basically have to take into account all of these factors to release the cargo at a very precise point in space that, factoring in the winds and everything else, the cargo will drift into the position and land exactly where it needs to land. And oftentimes these like drop zones, like this is a huge drop zone here, but a lot of times the drop zones are much, much smaller. And so the margin of error is much tighter. And if you drop off drop zone, of course, it could have very, very serious consequences, especially if you accidentally drop a Humvee into a village in Afghanistan or something. It'd be a pretty unwelcome thing to have come through your roof. So pretty serious. So this is another. I don't know what's going on here. It looks like there's a bunch of stuff that is coming apart. The interesting thing, so these actually are not the low-cost one-time use parachutes. These are multi-use parachutes, but there's kind of a effect which gets kind of interesting, like in Afghanistan, where you use these one-time use parachutes. Sometimes the very last bundles that kind of come out the jet, the air gets starved because of like all this sort of movement, and sometimes the last couple bundles don't properly inflate, and so you have like this, several of these bundles that just fall to the ground, and it can get pretty exciting. Like I saw one time a bundle, I don't know what was in it. It was like Gatorade or something, and it hit the ground and just like this massive explosion of like this like red color. It actually looked kind of cool. Not gonna lie, but probably less cool for the folks on the ground that have to clean it up. Oh, good. This is a picture of the fuel. This is kind of what I was talking about. So you can see these are like 160 barrels of fuel that will go out the back of the jet on a single pass. Oh, I didn't even mention there are. This is a boat. This is pretty cool. So you can actually airdrop boats into the ocean, and then a lot of times the crew or their special ops folks will actually jump out of the aircraft after the boat, and then that's basically how you can put them anywhere you want to go, like the Captain Phillips recovery. Troops, yeah, these guys are getting ready to go jump out. There's a picture of a troop drop. They can so troops can go out. There are two troop doors, is what they call them, in the back of the jet on either side, like you saw the video earlier where they go out. So you can actually drop troops out both doors simultaneously, and so you can actually drop basically 100 troops on a single pass, and it's just kind of like just a long line of parachutes and paratroopers that to the ground. Yeah, see, here's a good picture. This is like one of those exercises in North Carolina where you drop the heavy equipment, and then next pass is just like a massive wave of paratroopers. So this is like a mass style invasion. This is in Afghanistan. Actually, I took this picture. This was on a mission that I was on in Afghanistan. Dropping. So these are they're just supplies. So in these pallets, food, water, whatever they need, and then these low cost one-time use parachutes. One thing I did not actually mention is that the C-17 has the capability. They have these like really cool. I don't know if they're still. I don't know how often they get used, but there is, and well, they're super expensive for one. But there is a delivery system where you can actually drop, and this would be like super important if you're trying to target a very specific spot in a very austere location and you want to be super quiet about it. C-17 has the capability of airdrop from a high altitude. The chute deploys, and then there's actually a kind of a smart box, a smart system on board the airdrop button, which will actually control the steering mechanism of the parachute, and it'll basically fly it into a very specific spot. And you can even program it. You can pre-program it to fly like a very specific route and then land in a very specific spot. And so you can drop it fairly high altitude, think like at night, and then have this thing like kind of basically fly itself into position and then land wherever you need it to go, which is a super cool capability. And you program before you drop it. You actually you're using like a laptop, and then you communicate with it through like a Wi-Fi connection, and then you can kind of like pre-program these routes, and then you basically send the program route to the bundle, and then you drop it, and then it does its thing, then you fly away, which is pretty neat. It's super cool capability. So the next mission is humanitarian support airlift, and this is something the C-17 gets called upon all the time to do. Basically, name your disaster around the world. C-17 can act as the arm of U.S. aid and deliver, humanitarian supplies, and in many cases also evacuate folks as well. you can, in the lower left, I don't know exactly where this this picture was shot, but you can respond to an area where you need to evacuate folks, and you can actually put them on the floor. Not the most comfortable way of traveling, obviously. They have like, you can kind of see down there, they've got like these cargo straps, which basically act as like a big seatbelt, and you can just fit a ton of people in one aircraft, and you can just get the idea is basically just you get in, get people out as quickly as possible, and get them to safety, and then from the nearest possible safe point, then you can in a probably more comfortable, easier way, sort of distribute them, or arrange more comfortable means of travel. But it's a very capable aircraft to do that, and because it's the aircraft is kind of rugged, you can kind of get it into austere locations, semi-improved runways, or if there's damage to a runway, the C-17 has the capability of landing in a relatively short amount of distance and taking off in a relatively short amount of distance, so you can kind of get in and get out of pretty tight airfields that other large aircraft just can't operate out of. The C-17, incidentally, I didn't really mention this, but has the capability, it can kind of turn on a dime, and then it can also back up under its own power. So you can use a reverse thrust to actually control back the aircraft. So if you need to turn around in a tight point, you can kind of do like a 3-turn. So you kind of like turn, then back up, then turn, almost like the Austin Powers turn. If any of you guys have seen that movie, it's a great movie if you haven't. But the C-17 can kind of do that maneuver in a very tight space. Air medical evacuation, I kind of mentioned this earlier when I was talking about the specifications of the jet. These are the stanchions with 3 litters on them. You can see here. You can basically turn the jet into a flying hospital. And I've done these missions. I've evacuated folks out of both Afghanistan and Iraq to medical facilities. One time, I was actually flying one of those, long missions from Germany to Afghanistan and back. And while we were actually in the air, we got a phone call. So the jet actually has satellite phones on board. There are actually two satellite phones, so you can actually get phone calls, and you can make phone calls while you're flying via the satellite. And so we got a call telling us we'd been retasked because of there was, I forget exactly what happened in that particular case. I don't know if it was an IED or something, but somebody was severely injured and they needed to be evacuated for immediate medical treatment back to Germany. So we basically landed, offloaded our cargo, and then as quickly as possible, sort of transformed the jet into this flying hospital. All its equipment is actually on board here. It's flying around the world. But the stanchions here are always on board the aircraft, and so you can pretty quickly reconfigure, and then with a flying medical team, you can quickly turn it into a flying hospital, and then you can unload the patients, and then get them back to Germany as quickly as possible. And then, a lot of times when you fly those missions too, like, you carry a special call sign, and air traffic control will know that, that you're a air medical evacuation mission. So they'll give you priority in airspace if there is congestion, which is really nice. And then you can get folks back to those big facilities like we have in Germany to treat them in the best way possible. One other cool mission the C-17 does, the C-17 operates on all 7 continents. It operates in Antarctica, which is what's shown here. This is actually, incidentally, that jet on the lower right, I've flown that jet, and my buddy actually picked that one up from the factory here in California as it was brand new. And so he signed like a little panel on it. His name's on it, which is kind of neat. Anyway, that's an aside. The jet supports the National Science Foundation in it's one of the C-17's missions. Operates mainly out of Christchurch, New Zealand, and then we will supply transport both personnel and equipment to Antarctica to support that mission. But McMurdo, I think, is mostly where they fly to. I think there are a couple places they operate out of. But that's super cool. And the C-17 has been called upon for emergency situations as well to evacuate. I think they had one instance. This was several years ago where one of the scientists had cancer and needed to be evacuated, and so the C-17 was called upon to. And it was kind of during the winter. Most of these missions happen during the summer. Summer in the south, the southern hemisphere, which of course is winter up here. So usually from I think they go from November through February or something like that. That's kind of the prime season when weather is more optimal down there. When it's winter in Antarctica, which is our summer, the conditions are a lot more harsh, and it's very difficult. It's much more difficult to get in and out, but there have been instances in the past where the C-17 has been able to do so. It's been able to fly in and evacuate folks. They've done airdrop missions in Antarctica as well, where for whatever reason they can't land, they've airdropped supplies. Done a lot of cool things. Kind of rambling here, and I think we're quickly approaching our time. I want to leave time for questions as well. Here's a cool picture of the C-17 deploying flares. You would use flares to sort of confuse a heat-seeking missile, and so you would deploy flares, and then hopefully the missile sort of light off on those those hot flares rather than your engines, and then you'd live to fly another day. So a cool picture of formation, C-17s. I think this is the very last, the newest C-17 that left the factory here in California before they closed the factory. It was down in Long Beach. It's a cool picture. This is actually Travis Air Force Base. So this is just up the road in Vacaville. There are like an elephant walk is what they call it, because it's just a bunch of aircraft. You've got C-17s and then KC-10s, which are refuelers, and then in the very back you've got C-5s. They're in the back because they're probably going to break, and so you want them just to be back there where they can just break and they don't affect anybody else. I'm kidding, kind of. Another airdrop picture. It's heavy equipment bundle. It's a cool picture behind an air refueler. You can kind of see the URC, which is it's the receptacle for the air refueling boom. It's open right there, and then so you fly up into position behind the air refueler, and then you maintain that position, and then there's a boom operator that flies the boom into position and then extends the boom, makes physical contact with your jet, and there are clamps that kind of clamp it down, and then they start pumping into your aircraft. The rate is like 6,000 pounds per minute, which is like 1,000 gallons per minute. So it's fairly quick. You can get a lot of fuel in a fairly short amount of time. It's another dirt runway. And then this is flying a low-level mission. We both train for and sometimes employ low-level flying to get into a a space in which you want to fly as low as possible to avoid exposure to potential threats. So we would fly down at like 300 feet off the ground, and about we can fly up to 350 knots, which is you're pushing like 400 miles per hour, and this is a big airplane too, flying at that speed. Oh, I didn't actually mention. I should have mentioned previously. In the cockpit, I don't know if you noticed there are no yokes. It has sticks, and it's fully fly-by-wire flight controls with 4,000 psi, which probably means nothing to you, but it's really high pressure. And with the fly-by-wire plus the high pressure flight controls, the C-17 is incredibly responsive, and the fly-by-wire flight control system makes it very consistent in how it handles at whatever weight, at basically whatever conditions that you're operating out of. It basically flies the same, and so it has a very consistent feel from like a piloting perspective. So it makes it very easy to fly in tactical situations and to employ it in in maneuvers, which are pretty cool. Yeah, so here it is, basically flying a low-level mission, getting de-iced. Done that before. That's kind of no fun. Here's C-17 getting air fuel. This is actually the brand new tanker, the KC-46. they were doing kind of like testing here, formation with an F-16. So you can kind of see what it looks like. So that's a size that's a 767. So you can see they're about the same size. The C-17 is a little bit bigger, a little bit wider, and then a little bit heavier, but still quite large. Here's getting air refueled. I forget. I don't think. No, this is not. I took this picture. This was actually on my last flight in the C-17. My Finney flight. This is over California, just over Northern California here. Got air refueled by KC-10. This is the view from the cockpit. That's pretty much it. That was pretty much my picture show, my slideshow. Are there any questions? Yeah. So there's a very long answer to that question, but there are several different paths that one can take if you're interested in becoming a military pilot, or specifically an Air Force pilot. Pilots come from there are three main sources that you can sort of enter the military to become a pilot. But first and foremost, if you want to be a pilot in the Air Force, you have to first have a college degree. So you have to at least have a bachelor's of science or a BA, just an undergraduate degree. Then you have to get commissioned as a lieutenant, which means you have to become an officer in the military. And there are three ways of doing that. There is the Air Force Academy, which is where I went, and that's actually it's a college. It's a military academy, similar to West Point or Annapolis. It's just the Air Force's version of that. It's much better, just to be clear, than West Point or Annapolis. Just to be clear, that's one way. So if you go that route, then you basically go there as a college after high school, 4-year degree, get an engineering degree or get whatever degree. Then you graduate, become an officer. Then you go to pilot training after that. You can also do ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps, and this is an option for most people who go to traditional universities and colleges. And so you do training while you are going to school. It's typically like, one day a week. You wear your uniform and you go to ROTC classes. And then there are some commitments during the summer where you kind of like summer training and stuff like that. But basically at the end of your college experience, then you graduate, get your degree, and simultaneously then commission as an officer in the military. And then you can go to pilot training that way. And then the third way is what's called OTS, or Officer Training School. And this is if you already have a college degree and you didn't do ROTC and you didn't do the Air Force Academy, you can apply for this program. And then you, if you get accepted, you go to it's in Montgomery, Alabama for, I think it's like 13 weeks or something like that, basically like 90 days, I think. And at the end of that, then you commission as an officer, commission as a lieutenant, and then you go to pilot training. Now, of course, pilot training itself, so it's not quite just that easy, of course. You have to get a pilot training slot, and they can be kind of competitive. And I'm not trying to make a plug for the Air Force Academy here, but the good thing is the Air Force Academy predominantly gets however many slots, pilot training slots they want, meaning that if you go to the Air Force Academy and you graduate and you want to be a pilot and you are medically qualified, you will get to go be a pilot. So basically everyone that goes to the Air Force Academy, if they want it, they get a pilot training slot and they go to pilot training. ROTC, it gets a little bit more competitive. Very doable though, if you work very hard, you're very active, you engage, you're a very strong member of the ROTC. You volunteer, you show leadership skills, and you can generate a lot of support among both your peers as well as your the permanent party cadre that are kind of leading the organization. Then you can get selected for a pilot training slot that way. And then through OTS, which is the third method, it's a lot more difficult. I think the number of slots that are available to graduates of OTS is a much smaller number, but it's possible. I flew with people in I was flying the 17 who commissioned through OTS, so it's totally doable. It's a very real possibility. But yeah, those are the three biggest avenues that one can take to actually go do that. And then so once you go to pilot training, then out of pilot training, then pilot training is a whole another beast. But the long and short of it is, you get pilot training, and then after pilot training, you get selected for a particular aircraft. Everything is performance based, so the top individual in their class basically gets whatever, more or less, whatever aircraft they want, as long as it's available. Because everything is like, there's a timing thing, and there's like a needs of the Air Force, and so each class they're going to have a bunch of options, their aircraft and bases which are available, and then more or less you put your dream sheet, which is literally just your prioritization, your list of desires, and then based on where you stand in your class, based on what's available, then usually it's the top graduates sort of get what they want as far as aircraft and locations, and then tail on Charlie, whoever is the last graduate in the class, if their number one choice is available, they get it at a point, but if not, then they kind of get whatever's left over. But yeah, it's a very competitive process all the way through. I'm happy to talk, one-on-one or in a totally different forum on the process of selected and pilot training and all of that. There's a lot there, a lot to discuss. But if anybody's interested, I would be more than to engage with you on that. Oh, yeah, that's a great question. The short answer of it is yes, it really is. There are it's, fundamentally, obviously, there are some similarities between the C-17 and other big aircraft. Like, they have very similar systems. The engines are, like I said, the engines are the same engines that are on the 757. It has similar, hydraulic systems and pressurization systems, environmental systems like pressurization and heating and cooling, and like the pneumatic systems. The systems themselves are very similar, but the biggest difference is kind of like how the aircraft is employed. And on the military side of things, obviously we do a lot of things that you'll never find on the commercial side, like getting air refueled, for instance, or the airdrop mission, or a lot of the tactical flying, like flying like really low and really fast, and learning how to like sort of mask your radar signature by using terrain, or being able to sort of employ and maneuver the aircraft in that very aggressive fashion with high angles of bank. You're never going to do anything like that in a big aircraft. So it's a lot different, and the way that the military kind of treats training is slightly different. There are some similarities with crew resource management, and kind of how you work with a crew to sort of operate the jet, but the methods in which the jet is employed is very, very different. So it's kind of a unique experience. And the way that the military approaches pilot training too is slightly different. It's a very structured, very rigid process, very difficult, very very challenging, but also like I think the product is very good. Meaning that if you graduate from Air Force pilot training, it's a very significant accomplishment, and I think the military has a really good system where they're able to produce very, very good pilots. Yeah, so the C-17, obviously, it's a big aircraft with a huge radar signature. So if somebody really wanted to shoot down the C-17, it probably wouldn't be that difficult. This is not anything that's, I think it's kind of obvious. But the biggest thing that the C-17 has going for it is the intelligence network that sort of exists around. Like you're not going to fly into a place where you're likely to get shot down. Well, I say that, yet that's not always the case. If the mission is high enough priority, or if the mission warrants it, if it's a significant level that warrants the risk, then you will. but you're going to employ tactics. So the aircraft does have on board some measures to help protect it against threats. There are a couple systems, like you saw the pictures of the flares, and then there are other systems like this little turret looking there in the picture where I'm getting sprayed down. That thing has particular capabilities that kind of helps the C-17 fend off, certain weapons that get fired at it. And then you also employ, besides the equipment that's on board, you also employ tactics. So like how you fly, like at what altitudes, at what airspeeds, how you ingress an area. Either if you're coming, like I said, like the low level. So if it's like a radar threat, you're going to fly down super low to the ground, super fast. You're going to sort of evade. Because at that point, like I said, the intelligence, you should know where the threat exists. So you're going to avoid that threat to the max extent possible. And if you have to become exposed to it, then you're going to minimize your exposure by flying in a certain way at certain altitudes, at certain airspeeds. High angles of descent and high angles of ascent, as well, like getting out, getting in. So it's kind of a question. You've got some systems, but you also really need to employ tactics to try and protect yourself. Elizabeth, why did I pick this particular airplane versus a fighter aircraft? So I'm kind of weird in that I briefly kind of flirted with the notion of flying fighters, but I kind of always wanted to fly the C-17, even since I was like in high school, and then I went to the Air Force Academy. It kind of like cemented in my brain that this is kind of what I wanted to do. A lot of people kind of go to Air Force pilot training and they want to be a fighter pilot because it's sexy, it's cool, they're flying fast, and it's experience that you can absolutely not really get on the civilian side of flying. For me though, I was kind of attracted to C-17 for a couple different reasons. I always was just kind of in awe of the various missions that the C-17 does. I mean, everything from presidential support airlift to humanitarian airlift, aeromedical evacuation, airdrop, getting air refueled. I always thought that was super cool, and able to sort of employ that in a way that is of national importance. I think is super cool. The C-17 is obviously, it's a global aircraft too. Like it flies. I've literally taken it and flown around the world. I flew I've circumnavigated the globe on, one of my later missions before I left the Air Force. Started here in California, flew east, and then kept going all the way around until I got back here. Obviously I made several stops along the way, but it was super cool. So to me, I was always just like so attracted to the airplane and to the missions that it was what I really wanted to do. And fortunately, I was able to achieve that goal, and I was able to do it. Don't have any regrets whatsoever. It was a really cool experience. So happy that I was able to fly the C-17. Let's see, we got one more question. We got from Carter. What's up, Carter? What's the process of picking the plane you fly? So this kind of gets back to the pilot training discussion, so everybody in their pilot training class, you typically start in a pilot training class all together. We started with, I think there were 27 of us in my pilot training class. And you start in pilot training, the first 6 weeks is ground school. Then after ground school, then you have about 6 months of flying the T6, which the T6 is I can just pull it up here. T6A. It's this little guy. Yeah, so you can kind of see that there. Well, I shouldn't. Okay. See how many clicks I have to make. So you start off by flying the T6, dual seat trainer. It's got a PT6A, so a turboprop engine on it. This airplane is a lot of fun to fly. So you fly this for about 6 months, and then at the end of that 6 months, they take a number of factors into consideration, such as your flying scores, because everything you do in pilot training is graded. and evaluated, and you're like, it never ends. You're just constantly being evaluated. They even evaluate like your physical fitness, like you have to do PT tests, and that's a component that they measure. But at the end of this, also your peers can weigh in heavily too. Like you could be the best pilot in the world, but if you're such a jerk that nobody wants to work with you, it's not gonna go very well. So at the end of the 6 months flying the T6, then they do what they call track select, meaning that they split the class, and then some of the classes, some in the class who go off to the fighter bomber track, they go off and fly the T-38. By the way, the T-38 is about to get replaced. This is a cool picture. Okay, well, yeah, you can kind of see it there. So they go off and fly the T-38. And that's the fighter bomber track. Obviously it's widely well sought after. A lot of people really want to go do that. Then those who get selected for the tanker transport track, they call it, go off and fly the T1 Jayhawk, which is basically it's a military version of a beach jet, basically beach jet 400. And so you go off and fly that for about 6 months. Then they used to, I don't think they still do. They used to, for those who selected to go fly the C-130, they used to go, I think it's the T-44. Nope. I forget what it is. It's basically it's a King Air. I forget what it is. And then there's a helicopter track. So there are basically 4 tracks, or there used to be 4 tracks. The helicopter track they would go fly. I think there's some variant of the UH-1 or the Huey, I think, in at Fort Rucker, Alabama. So you basically go kind of train with the Army to go fly helicopters for 6 months. And then, so you kind of split off in pilot training, go to those 4 tracks. The 2 biggest tracks are the fighter bomber flying T-38s, or the tanker track, tanker transport track, where you fly the T-1. And then at the end of that 6 months, so you've been in pilot training about a year, then of course, because everything is graded, everything, like there's a score behind everything. And at the end, the class gets racked and stacked, and whatever aircraft are available at that point then sort of become part of the pool of what's available for the class. And then there's a selection process where typically the top graduate gets their first choice, number 2, number 3, so on and so forth, throughout the entire list of the class. And then everybody gets selected for their aircraft. And then, so obviously you're a basic pilot at this point. You're not even qualified in anything. You're just a basic Air Force pilot. Then you go off to train on that specific aircraft. So if you got selected to fly F-35s or F-16s, you're going to go to Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, and you'll go through the pool there, get qualified in that jet, and then go off to your unit. And then you're still really not qualified. Then you have to get mission qualified. So you get qualified to fly the jet, and then you get qualified to actually employ that jet for its intended mission. Or like for me, I got selected for the C-17, so I went to Altus Air Force Base in Oklahoma. I spent about 4 months there, where I got qualified in the C-17. I figured out, learned to fly it, and I got qualified to be a C-17 pilot. Then I went to my unit in Washington State, in McCord Field near Seattle. And then further from that point, I got mission qualified to actually employ the jet in its intended mission on missions around the world. And then you can actually, take it off and go do the intended mission of it. So it kind of depends. And then I kind of left off. You also have to do other things like survival training and water survival training and evasion, resistance, escape training, where you learn how to be a PU and all that fun stuff. But yeah, it was a long answer to a short question. But the short answer is you get selected by the aircraft based on it's a competitive process through where you're evaluated in pilot training.